Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at two highly cushioned running shoes from Brooks. We have the Ghost Max, and we also have the Glycerin 21. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Now, the reason we're taking a look at both the Ghost Max and the Glycerin 21 is they fall into the same category. They are both max cushion neutral daily trainers. They have a ton of stack height underfoot. Great for runners that want a little bit more cushioning and want a large midsole. That is where these come in. Now, funny enough, I do think the Ghost Max was Brooks' response to the very popular Hoka Clifton. So you get a ton of cushioning, a nice comfortable upper, and a very pleasant ride. And there are some key differences between these two highly cushioned shoes, which I'm excited to talk about here. Something I do want to point out is the Ghost 16, which is Brooks' more moderately cushioned neutral daily trainer, is more closely related to the Glycerin 21, as they share the same kind of foam in the midsole, than it is to the Ghost Max, with which it shares the same series name, as the Ghost Max has DNA Loft V2 in the midsole. So I'm very curious to see what Brooks does with the Ghost Max. I'm sure they will keep it around, but I do think they will mix it up, and I'm very curious to see what that implementation looks like. As far as the stats go, the Ghost Max costs $150, while the Glycerin 21 is $160. They both have the same amount of stack height in the heel with 28 millimeters. However, the drops are different. We have a 6 millimeter drop on the Ghost Max and a 10 millimeter drop on the Glycerin, which means you get about 18 millimeters in the forefoot for the Glycerin and 22 in the forefoot for the Ghost Max, which means you're going to have a bit more cushion towards the forefoot. However, the Ghost Max does weigh just slightly more, coming in at 10 ounces, while the Glycerin 21 is 9.8 ounces. Moving on to the uppers, we have two very different experiences here. On the Ghost Max, we have a really traditional engineered mesh, feels very familiar to a Brooks running shoe, has decent breathability, and is quite comfortable. And then if we move over to the Glycerin, we have a new knit upper. I think it's comfortable and looks pretty cool. However, the breathability isn't as good compared to the more typical engineered mesh we see on the Ghost Max. Both shoes fit true to size. My only minor complaint is on the Ghost Max, I feel like the toe box is slightly tapered, just a bit too much. I do prefer a bit more volume, while you have just a little bit more room on the Glycerin with regard to the toe box here. Both tongues are non-gusseted and have a solid amount of padding. I do wish they were gusseted. That's more of a minor preference, but they absolutely get the job done and are comfortable. If we move towards the back of the shoe, the heel counters are quite rigid, maybe a little bit more flex on the Ghost Max, and they have about the same amount of padding in the ankle and Achilles area. I thought the lockdown on both was stellar. I felt very connected to the platforms, and again, the two minor differences are you have a little bit more volume, I think, to the toe box on the Glycerin, and some more breathability to the upper itself on the Ghost Max. And then if we talk about the midsoles, this is where the differences become very apparent. On the Glycerin 21, we have DNA Loft V3, a nitrogen infused foam, and then on the Ghost Max, we have DNA Loft V2, which is not nitrogen infused. So what does that all mean for you, the consumer? Well, they have different manufacturing methods, but essentially when it comes down to it, DNA Loft V3 is going to be slightly lighter, has a little bit more squish, and just feels softer overall compared to DNA Loft V2. So the Glycerin is the softer shoe compared to the Ghost Max. And because the Ghost Max is slightly firmer, you do have a more rigid and more strict midsole. It's not as flexible or as bendable compared to the Glycerin, which is a little bit more forgiving towards the forefoot. This is by no means a super flexible shoe, but it is going to bend just a little bit easier compared to the Ghost Max. I'll also say because the Ghost Max has a more strict midsole, you will notice the rocker geometry more here compared to the Glycerin. And when you line these two shoes up, you'll notice that the Ghost Max has a slightly wider heel area. And I do think that all kind of plays into the Ghost Max being a slightly more stable max cushion running shoe. Great for runners that don't want to go to a full-on stability shoe, but do want a little bit of guidance. I think the Ghost is going to be right up your alley, especially because you have some foam walls on both the lateral and medial side to kind of keep your foot and ankle contained, while that does not exist really here on the Glycerin. So if you need a little bit of support and guidance, I think the Max might be a better fit than the Glycerin. I think Brooks did a great job with both of these max cushion neutral trainers. There's nothing crazy going on here. There's nothing super fun and exciting like a PIBA midsole. They're not overly bouncy or expressive. There's no plate or anything like that, but for a rather traditional max cushion setup, I found these to be quite comfortable. Now for me, I do lean more towards the Glycerin. It's a touch lighter. The midsole is softer and more responsive, and I do like how the upper fits just a little bit more. However, if I want to have just a little bit of guidance or support and feel more of a rocker geometry, that's kind of when I lean towards the Ghost Max. Moving to the outsole, plenty of rubber coverage here on both shoes, which is good to see for a daily trainer. No major issues with regard to grip, and there's three things I want to point out. The first is the Ghost Max has flat-waisted geometry or a wider midfoot, which helps with the overall stability story like we talked about before. The second thing is both the Glycerin and the Ghost Max have rubber through the flex grooves, which stiffen up the forefoot, make things a little bit snappier. Again, the Ghost Max is more rigid compared to the Glycerin, which also has those flex grooves partially filled in. And then the third thing is I do think the rubber on the Glycerin is ever so slightly thicker compared to the Ghost Max. So theoretically, I think you might get a little bit more durability out of the Glycerin outsole. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments which Brooks Max Cushion shoe you would choose, or would you go with a completely different running shoe? I would love to hear from you. I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.